I hate Lee. I don't like him. I'm not gonna lie to you about not liking Lee. You're gonna feel it throughout this video. Hey sweetheart, welcome into Terror Tuesday, the show that combines dead meat skill count with Kenny JD's bad movies in a beat to bring you a sum that's less than its parts. But if you don't know what that means, essentially I'm gonna be doing my makeup inspired by whatever movie I'm talking about, while telling you about some sort of horror, thriller, otherwise dark and kind of gory movie, and we'll go from there. So today, we are talking about 1971's The Velvet Vampire, which was directed by Stephanie Rotham. This movie is from that fun part of Hollywood in which we're out of the Hays Code, but we're not getting good representation either. Like, you're still killing your gays, but, like, you're not being quiet that they're gay. That being said, it is a fun time. Like, I genuinely enjoyed it. It has makeup done by Raphael Patterson, and to give you a better description, The Velvet Vampire is this, like, very hazy, sort of half dream, half life movie in which a married couple has been invited to a vampire's home, not knowing she is a vampire, as she attempts to seduce both of them. Now, we're gonna be doing some makeup inspired by my favorite look in the movie. It's so good. I'll get to it when we get there. And even though Diane doesn't have a scar, we're gonna be playing around with using highlights and spirit gum to create indentation scar sort of concepts. Diane doesn't have a scar, but you know, some do.
Battle scars.
Now, if any of that sounds interesting to you, you can head over to Trigger Warnings, and I'll see you right after. This movie opens with the most beautiful credit sequence and opening title sequence that I have ever seen. A piece of bloodstone. It's this gorgeous, like, red. I did not mean to do my foundation first, but I guess we're going to. It's this beautiful red, sort of shimmering look that fades into a cross on the street, and then we pan down from that cross, which I assume tops the church. We don't ever really learn what that building is, not the one we're about to enter, so it doesn't really matter. But we go from that cross to a nighttime street in which we see a woman in bright red making her way down the road. She has this gorgeous frilly collar, and she is headed to Stoker's Gallery, which is going to be a sort of main character place for us. It's the very important place of this movie, but that's really all you need to know about the place right now. However, as she's on her way in, she gets grabbed from behind by the throat, slammed down, her attacker clamps on top of her. Let me tell you, this scene terrified me. Like, I was not expecting a sexual assault scene that early into the movie, and yet. However, it doesn't get to go well, as when she tries to scream, he tries to cover her mouth, and she bites him, like, hard. He goes to react, and she is able to get his knife from him. So by the time he has her pinned down again, she stabs him. It's very unclear where. It's either in the side or in the neck. I can't quite tell. But either way, he's down for the count, giving us our first kill at 3.5 minutes in. And then we see Diane washing the blood off of her hands in one of those cute little fountains before one of the most, like, amazing songs starts playing. I don't fully know who Evil Woman belongs to. I'm sure it's the guy who's playing it in the movie. But whoever it is, flowers to you. It is so good. The song is very clearly there to allude to us that she's a vampire, because we do not see her actually eat this guy. I wouldn't either, girl. She's so real. However, we're going to switch focus for a second now that we're in this gallery. and focus on our main couple, Susan and Lee, who are playing a game of pickup. They're pretending they don't know each other and flirting. Lee asks Susan if she goes to the gallery often. Her response is that she's only there when she wants to get some ass, which she's so real for. Where is my lid? And walk over to a statue. Mind you, the whole time they're having this discussion, we're watching Diane, like, behind them kind of creepily. That being said, they head over to a statue, and Lee calls it creepy, but Susan thinks it's sensual, which I think sets a really good tone for where this movie's gonna go. Diane, however, steps in and says that she believes the sculptor sculpts death. And when asked by Lee if she thinks that's sexy, her response is that death can be sexy to the right person. You're a vampire, so I'm gonna forgive you. And that's all I'm saying to you. So after that, Carl Stoker, who is the owner of the gallery, walks over and, like, here's the thing. I get that Carl's name is a reference to Dracula. Why was it not a reference to the author of Camilla? Carmilla? You know what I'm talking about. Came first, female vampire, makes more sense to be the focus of this movie. But who am I to tell Stephanie what to do? Not that she would listen to me. I was not born when this movie came out. So even if she was willing to listen to me, I wouldn't have been there for her to listen to. But I just think it's kind of obvious if you're making a movie inspired by that book, more so than Dracula, to use that book. But who am I to tell them what to do? After Carl introduces them, Lee takes Diane to get a drink. Susan asks for one, and mind you, you can tell from that moment Lee is not going to get it for her. But we'll focus on that part later. But while Lee is talking to Diane, Susan is talking to Carl, trying to kind of get a feel on Diane. You immediately get this feeling that Susan's a little thrown off by her, and she should be. But that being said, well, we're gonna go talk about Lee and Diane. They're getting their drinks. He notices some blood on her neck. She says it's from a cat that she found in the street and was helping. It's really not all that important. He asks her another question. I don't fully remember what it was, but then it turns to them coming back to Susan to tell her that they're gonna go stay at Diane's desert house. And isn't that so kind of Diane to let them stay at her desert house? Next, which, like, you know what? I'm not even gonna feel bad for y'all when you die, because why are you going to a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere? In the middle of absolute nowhere. You're just going deep in the desert with some person you've never met a day in your life. For what reason? For what are you gaining from going to the desert with this strange woman? Ass. You're trying to gain ass. Like your wife was when you got there. But still, I know men don't think, but this is a little far into men don't think. We're gonna cut to Susan in the bath. Lee is coming in to join her. She's clearly upset, though, and tells him the tub is not big enough for two, which it's not. He tells her to move over and make room, and she tells him she's still waiting on her drink. Very real of her. I love that she didn't let that go. I know people are probably going to find her upsetting, like a little annoying. I'm on her side every single time. No doubt in my mind, if Susan feels it, I agree with her. Because, like, your husband sucks, babe. He sucks. And also, you seem to be more aware of what's going on around you. But she makes a snarky, jealous comment about Diane, of which his response is that they just aren't going to go into the desert. If she doesn't want to go, they just won't go. However, our next shot is going to be them in the desert. They're driving through. Susan's upset. Like, not upset, but she's bothered by the fact that they haven't seen another car for miles, which, like, again, Susan, you're so real and I love you. However, her stupid husband doesn't seem to be bothered. he just kind of stops over for gas, which there's a sign saying that it's the last chance for gas. And like, how far? How far is it the last chance for gas? Like, is it the last chance ever? I've got questions. I've got a lot of questions about this movie. And I know they're not going to get answered, but that doesn't change that they're there. That being said, he is very snarky to the people working there. There's a guy who's obviously a mechanic. He's, like, visibly working on a car under the hood. And Lee is snappy with him. Hey, can I get some service? His response is, I don't do gas, I'm a mechanic. Which Lee is very bothered by when a guy does come out to pump his gas. His response is very, he, like, tells the guy that he's got a real smart ass, and, like, bro, he's a mechanic. He doesn't pump gas. You literally went to pump your own gas before the other guy came out. You know how. You're just annoying. But he asks the guy for directions to Diane's house. The guy's response is more so ignoring it. But when Susan brings it up, he does tell them how to get there. But he's very snappy about it. He clearly doesn't want to be involved in whatever's happening over there. He said that is not his circus. And he won't be making it his circus. And he is very real for that, you know? You can't get mad at him. But that money they spent on gas turns out to be a waste, as in a few minutes, the car ends up breaking down, which Susan says, I know we shouldn't have come, which is really her being upset, but he gets real snappy about it. Their ability to argue gets cut off, though, as Diane comes down on a dune buggy and picks them up. She promises them that their car will be taken care of because we take care of each other out here in the desert. Susan asks how she found them, and her response is just luck, I guess, which Lee has no question about. We're then going to go to a dinner scene, which has my favorite makeup in the whole movie. Diane looks so beautiful. Like, she's so beautiful in this scene. But they're having steak tartare, which Susan is not interested in. She doesn't want any. And Lee gets very annoyed with her for that. However, Diane immediately is like, oh, I'll, like, get a salad made for you. That's fine. Lee keeps arguing with her to try it. Susan's clearly getting upset. The doorbell rings while they're arguing. Diane promises to have a salad made a second time, and then it cuts to Juan, which is... How do I describe what Juan is? He's like a housekeeper, but he's not. Kind of a chef, but he's not. He's there. He's Diane's person who is there with her. That's how we'll word him. But he goes and opens the door. It is the mechanic earlier. I don't think I said his name, but his name is Cliff, if that matters to you. Cliff is there to work on the dune buggy. However, we know the buggy is fine, and there's no real reason he should be there to work on it. We cut back from them. We'll be back to Susan, Lee, and Diane. Diane and Lee are very aggressively ogling each other and having a conversation about teaching him to drive the dune buggy, but it's very sexual. It's very clear that she's using a double entendre. Understandably, Susan's really bothered by it. She says she wants to go to bed, and Lee interrupts her to ask what Diane does around there at night. Her response is that they mainly sleep, and so he agrees to go to bed, promises to make it up to them in the morning, and then goes to the living room with her wine, where Juan tells her that there is a young man there for her. When she asks if she'll like him, the response is that he is the same age as Victor. We haven't met Victor yet, but, like, I'm gonna go ahead and spoil who Victor is. That's her dead husband. Her husband who she murdered. So, asking if she's like, if he is someone she'll like, kind of gives you an idea of what that means once you know who Victor is, but it was very confusing to have just a random guy introduced. While watching, I kind of wish we had had a little more. Like, I understand it's supposed to be confusing, but I still wish we kind of had a little more there. But Diane goes out to the garage and watches Cliff before going over to make out with him. He immediately joins in and is down until she bites him. He tells her that she's got the wrong guy, he's not into that, to which Diane says,
"If you don't want me, I'll just deem you gay."
But by that I mean that she tells him she will give him to Juan then. He goes to run away and runs into a pitchfork, which impales him. He bounces around with it for a minute, like trying to figure out how to get out of there, but regardless of if it's the pitchfork or if it's Diane, he does die here at 17, almost 18 minutes in. Screaming from him alerts Susan, who is very uncomfortable about it. She asks Lee. Lee tries to tell her it's a coyote, which, like, her response is that it sounded human, and he said they do sometimes. And, like, yeah, they do, but, like, what coyotes are you around that make that sort of noise? Anyway, whatever you say, buddy. She then mentions not liking a mirror that is in the room with them, which, girl, I wouldn't either. It takes up half the wall and is pointed at the bed. I don't mess with mirrors pointed at the bed. For obvious reasons. That being said, she says it's because the mirror makes her feel like someone's watching her. Lee says someone is, and it's her. They start to have a little bit of a sexual situation, but it's very clear it doesn't go anywhere past maybe her getting head from the way it's done. But it moves in to Diane watching them very intently. Lee says please, assumingly about going all the way or whatever, because they're already not just being buddies. Susan says she doesn't feel like it, so he quits cuddling with her, rolls over, goes to sleep. This really interests Diane, who sparks at them, and then this is our first dream sequence. I love these weird, hazy dream sequences. I think they're beautiful. This one, is the start of them. They all connect. And in this, Susan and Lee are in this beautiful, gold-framed, ornate bed. It has red silk sheets and this beautiful white fluffy blanket. It's in the middle of the desert, and the mirror is also there. They are, according to Susan, making love. They're making out on the bed, and Diane comes out of the mirror to pull Lee away from her. She's in this beautiful red, this shade of red flowy outfit. It's gorgeous. But the dream causes Susan to wake up. She rolls over to tell Lee about it. Lee is also having the same dream, and while she says in her dream Lee was being pulled away from her, he says in his dream she was pushing him away. So while they're having the same dream, it's slightly different compared to what Diane is trying to do. This conversation doesn't get to go on for very long, though, as Diane comes in, wakes them up, and tells them that they need to get a move on if they're gonna go look at the desert. Susan said she doesn't really want to look at the desert, and her husband says, well, you don't want to do anything. Again, I hate Lee. When you die, I won't be disappointed. I won't. But we're gonna go ahead and move on forward. They end up getting in the dune buggy with her. Susan asks if she's covered up enough, because Diane made a comment about making sure you're covered up to protect you from the sun. Diane tells her that the sun can hurt you if you let it, which again, true, but very clearly is just to go with her old vampire vibes. But from there, they end up going to visit an abandoned mine. Diane starts telling them about how the mine got shut down because all the miners were dying. Totally not concerning at all. Diane, thank you. Susan asks how they were dying. Diane's response is that some people thought it was an animal, other people thought it was a person, but others thought it was neither, and that the miners were all found with gashes on their necks. So, us who know we're in a vampire movie, we're like, oh, she's killing them. They don't know that, though, so they follow her into the mine. She tells them to stay close and then immediately wanders off. Lee goes to find her, tells Susan to stay put, but then Diane starts doing this weird whispery thing for Susan. Susan then gets attacked by a bat. She tries to run off from the bat and ends up nearly getting run over by a random mine shaft. It's a very strange time in this movie, but I had a good time with it. As she's freaking out and, crying because she's scared, understandably so, Diane ends up finding her, grabbing her by the waist, which terrifies her until she realizes who it is, and her response is just, "Oh, it's you, thank God it's you," which Diane is obviously getting off on. But after that, they leave the mine and they go to a bar in which... Oh, wait, no. Diane collected a piece of bloodstone while she was off on her little adventure. She makes a comment about how blood is the fuel of life, or, like, the need of life, something like that, which, like, yeah, obviously. But, again, it's one of those little comments she's making that's supposed to make it obvious to them. She's a vampire and just doesn't. But when they get to the bar, Susan has no interest of going into it. She says she's just gonna stay right there and collect sun, and so, of course, her husband takes this opportunity to try and get in Diane's pants. He's trying to do the role play thing he does with Susan, and pretending to be the bartender. Diane instead goes into telling him the history of the bar, and when asked what else they did, because she mentions they didn't just drink there, Diane's response is this, and she starts undoing his shirt. But it keeps cutting between this scene that's obviously attempting to be what they're gonna pretend is a sex scene until she bites him, and she does go in for his neck. A rattlesnake is slowly but surely approaching Susan and ends up biting her on the thigh. The way she screams brings the two of them out before Diane can kill her husband. Girl, you couldn't have waited like Snake buddy. You couldn't have waited like a minute. We could have been rid of Lee. But no, we couldn't wait a minute. They run outside. Lee gives the most insanely funny line delivery of, "It's a snake," that I've heard in my entire life.
Jesus, a snake!
It's so strange. I don't know what emotion he was trying to portray there, and I think that's fun. I had a great time. But he swats it off of her with a stick. Diane focuses in on dealing with the poison. She has this really ornate knife in her car. Not her car, in her dune buggy. Ends up cutting open the puncture wound so she can suck out the venom. And then takes Susan back to the house so she can nap. Suddenly, Susan's liking it there. And Susan, you are so real for liking it there after Diane has her mouth on you. I think that's hilarious. I love this stupid movie. That being said, Diane calls Susan a brave girl, tells her to take a nap, and then Diane and Lee go back out to go sightseeing. She takes him to the graveyard where her husband is buried. Now, this is when we figure out who Victor is. If you were going based off of what is happening, Victor really is not all that important of a character. It's just so we know what she does with her lovers. But Susan wakes up from her nap and goes looking for Diane and Lee, because obviously she wakes up alone. She ends up finding the room in which Diane sits to watch them, but as she goes to open it and grab the tapestry, Juan yells at her to keep her hands off of it. And she listens, because she has no reason not to. She then brings up how Diane told them her family took Juan in which Juan responds that there was never a family, it was always just Diane. Which... why is this not setting off alarm bells, baby? This should be setting off alarm bells. I don't know though, maybe she's just too distracted by the fact that she is in the prettiest baby doll I have ever seen. Like, I need it. It's so cute. But cut back to Diane and Lee at their husband's grave. She mentioned she doesn't actually like living in the desert, but her husband's buried there, so she has to stay. He asks why she hasn't moved the body, and her response is that the way she had it prepared, his body would crumble if it ever left the desert. Which, what? But okay, he believes it, or at least, like, believes it enough. He goes to kiss her, but oh, yeah, I didn't mention this. While Susan's being all nosy, a woman comes to the house looking for Cliff, which was the mechanic. She wasn't that important then, but she is important now, so I really should have mentioned her. But she shows up at the graveyard and tells Diane, like, hey, my husband was supposed to be at your house last night. Cliff never came home. Where is Cliff? Diane's response is that she told them she didn't need him, but the woman is very adamant that her husband did in fact go to Diane's house that night. She mentions one of the graves looking fresh, asks Diane about it, and Diane gets very defensive and says that she is not the Undertaker, so she would not know if a grave was fresh. So, they leave. The woman comes back with a shovel, and her plan is to dig up the grave, but Juan is there. He hands her down so Diane can feed off of her, giving us our third death at 40 minutes into the movie. Now, we're going to cut back to them in bed. Susan is now very pro-Diane. Who could blame her? And she tells Lee this. However, she does tell Lee about what Juan told her. Lee just tells her not to trust Juan. They both have the dream again, in which Lee is able to fully get to Diane from Susan and begins slipping her dress off of her chest. When he wakes up from this dream, he rolls over and checks that Susan is actually asleep before heading out the room to go find Diane, who is currently in a very ornate robe eating a whole raw chicken. A whole raw chicken. That being said, Lee makes a comment on it about how she's eating raw liver. Her response is that people feed their cats raw liver. They're cats. Lee responds that the cats are animals. Her response is, so are humans. And tells him to let go of his animal. So, while they are very clearly about to have sex, we cut to Susan, who has woken up without Lee after having a dream that he's having sex with someone else. Heads downstairs, finds Lee having sex with Diane. Diane then turns to Susan and makes very intense eye contact with her, and smiles at her, while Susan just kind of stands there and watches, which is going to be brought up again later, don't worry. But it's cutting to the next morning, and Susan, who is very obviously on some sort of agenda, goes into the kitchen and tells Juan that she'll take breakfast for him that morning. She takes it to the living room. She says she thought maybe they could eat in there, have a picnic, grabs the robe that her husband cheated on her with someone else on top of, and goes to kneel on it. Then he asks about the car, because again, Diane said their car would be taken care of. She says that they called and said a part wasn't in, so it's gonna be another day because it is currently Sunday, and their parts wouldn't be able to come in until Monday. Now, Lee has a meeting the next day he says he really has to get to, but Susan reminds him that he can just reschedule. I mean, it'd be really wrong to hit and run. So Diane leaves the room. She goes to take flowers to her husband. She says she'll be back later. Lee snaps and he's like, yeah, I slept with her. Like, what do you want me to say? Like, will you stop being mean to me now? And her response is,
how can I put you down for something I could do myself?
She's so real. I love her. I love her so much. Cut to Diane, who is taking the flowers off of her husband's grave, sort of emptying it out. We see the dates on it and realize her husband died the same year the miners did, which will come back up later, but right now isn't that big a deal. We knew that her husband was probably older than she said. It didn't really matter to us. But back to it, Susan is standing by the pool. Apparently she's been ignoring Lee. Lee tells her that he isn't into Diane, that Diane is a desert freak, and he is only into his wife. Seemed a little different last night when you were in her, but okay. He then offers to show Susan what he and Diane did, which for some reason seems to turn Susan on, and then he throws Susan in the pool. It's really a throwaway scene. It doesn't really matter. Cut back to Diane, who is laying on top of the coffin in her husband's grave. Juan heads out there. He is unaware that Diane knows. He said her family didn't take care of him. He asks why she killed her husband. Her response is that she tried to stay away from her husband. To which he says, then why did you marry him? And her response is, well, why do you stay with me? He says he can't leave her alone, especially like this, as she is getting weaker and having to feed more often. She mentions how hungry she's been all the time, and he offers to get her someone to feed on. He even offers to go back to the reservation he grew up on and get her someone from there. She tells Juan that he's too good to her, reaches up, seemingly to let him pull her out the grave, but instead she pulls Juan in and eats him, giving us our fourth death at 51.5 minutes in. Juan was the only death I was upset about. What did he do? Why did Juan die? We didn't need to kill Juan. But Lee and Susan end up taking the doom buggy up to the graveyard so Lee can show it to Susan because she didn't get to go the day before while she was asleep. Susan really doesn't like how old all the graves are. Freaks her out. And she ends up kind of wandering away from him and stumbling onto Juan's body in Susan's husband's grave. They go back to the house. They tell Diane about it. Susan argues maybe an animal attacked Juan, but Lee says there's no way an animal did that. He's correct. This whole scene is just very long and drawn out. It essentially comes to Lee wants to call the cops. Susan tells him no. And she says that calling the cops is going to be her responsibility. Leaves them alone. We cut to them in bed. Lee recounts the story of Diane's husband to his wife. He says he's ready to leave and says, but she seems so upset about Juan. His response is that thinks Diane can't feel it all and that he wants to leave as soon as their car is ready. Which, I mean, that's fair enough. I would want to leave too, especially when I was supposed to leave that day. However, Diane ends up sending them the dream again, and it starts with Lee being, pulling her dress down further, but the second he gets it fully off, he is holding the empty dress, and Diane is back in it somehow, walking over to Susan. She ends up cutting an X, like, on Susan's chest with the ornate knife she used to pull the venom out, and sucking on, unclear whether it's her nipple or the cut, because Diane's head is in the way, so we can't see that she's not actually sucking on it at all. But that dream wakes Lee up like it's a nightmare. He turns over, starts looking for the X on Susan, To which Susan kind of laughs and says, oh, this one was my dream. So real. So real, Susan. Anyway, Diane is back in the graveyard. She takes the dress from her dream she's been giving the couple, just for her to end up taking it off and fully climbing into Victor's coffin with him. Fully naked, just rubbing his chest laying there. Now, Lee calls the station while she's doing this and finds out that it would really only take a day to fix their car. But a woman called up there and said not to do anything to it until she gave them the okay. So obviously, Lee is upset. He starts shouting, the other guy hangs up on him. So real. I love the gas station guy. He is the most realistic character. He does get a little creepy with Susan at points, but you know, he does give her a jacket at that point, so like it might even out. That being said, we are going to end up back at the pool where Susan is once again tanning. And Diane comes over and asks how long she and Lee have been married. We find out they've been married for 2 years, and Diane asks if Susan has taken on any other lovers while they've been married. Obviously, Susan says it's not Diane's business, to which Diane says, you know, men are jealous of us. They're jealous of the pleasure we can have and how they can never have pleasure like that. Very clearly trying to get Susan willing to kiss her. Susan is very clearly considering kissing her, which, like, girl, do it. They're not going to, though, because it's the 70s. Instead, Lee comes outside and interrupts their conversation. He says he wants to talk to his wife alone, and Diane leaves, even though she's very clearly not interested in leaving them. He tells Susan about the car. Susan doesn't really care. So he says, where's that bitch? And starts heading upstairs to go get Diane. However, when he walks into her room, he sees that she is sitting on the exact bed from the dream they've been having. She kind of beckons him over, says she's been hungry for him since they met, and she properly seduces him. She says, you don't want to leave me. He agrees that he doesn't want to leave her. She tells him that she's really very old and asks him if he knows who has always been in the grave of her husband, because she claims the reason her husband's grave has the wrong dates is because his great-grandfather, who he was named after, was in the grave first, and she reused it. So now she's asking if he knows who's always been in the grave. He says her husband. She says yes, and she asks if her being really very old bothers him. He says no. She asks if he wants her to touch him. He says yes. So she kisses down his stomach, and then she comes back up and bites his neck. Finally killing this at 1 hour and 4 minutes in. I guess I'm supposed to care, but like, hell yes. I hated Lee. Lee is so obnoxiously misogynist. I cannot stand him. And I did not feel any sort of remorse when he died. Now, Susan ends up going upstairs while this is happening. She starts, looking for Lee, looking for Diane. She finds her bags fully packed, but Lee is nowhere near them. Or, the bags are half packed, something like that. So she ends up going back to that room Juan told her not to go into, and discovering that it is a two-way mirror, that she's been correct, that someone has been watching her and her husband. Now, she gets jump scared by Juan's body being behind her. Why did Diane move the body there? I couldn't tell you, but it's very funny that she did, so I'm gonna let her have it. So Susan is now going to Diane, and she is like, she gives her the same speech of, I've been hungry for you since I met you, this, that, and the third. Tells Diane she wants her, and Diane, tells Susan she wants her, and Susan's kind of down. She's not denying that she wants Diane until something falls. and that something turns out to be Lee's body. And that sort of snaps Susan out of it. Her discomfort around it is a little too much. She ends up grabbing Diane's little ornate knife, attempts to stab Diane, goes straight through her hand, and then she doesn't even get her, she doesn't even end up getting her shoes. She just runs out. She leaves. She comes across the guy from the gas station and manages to get him to pull over. He asks where she's running from. She says she's not running, but she needs a way to get to LA. Assumingly this is where the rest of the movie had been taking place. I don't know. He gives her a coat because she's in a bikini and mentions that she didn't even say thank you for him stopping, so she says thank you then. Then he takes her to a Greyhound bus for her to get back to LA. And who is on this Greyhound bus, you're asking? Except Diane, who moves up to sit right behind Susan, but doesn't directly bother her. She just kind of moves in and encroaches on her territory. They get to a bus station, and she starts running off. She tries to find someone to report it to, finds a cop, starts telling him about what happened, and we get just the absolute escalator scene from Diane, who Susan sees and starts running. She heads to a telephone booth, calls Carl from the beginning of the movie. And Carl doesn't fully believe her, but he says he'll come pick her up. But Diane is already at the telephone pole, and not the telephone pole, the telephone box, and Susan ends up running away from her. From there, they go out into the street, in which Susan realizes that a crucifix has stopped Diane. So she calls to the people around her and asks them for help. They all kind of just grab crucifixes with her and start chasing this woman, no questions asked, which is so fun. Talk about a community. But they end up bringing Diane to the ground, stripping off her robe and her hat to expose her to the sun. And, ooh, this is thick. And they leave her there to die. She, rapidly ages. And then dies of sun exposure at 1 hour and 16 minutes in. We spend the last 3 minutes at Carl's house with Susan, who they have found Lee's body. Yeah. They found Lee's body, and they're planning to bring Susan in for questioning the next day. She's currently staying with Carl. Carl starts talking to her about Diane and how she wasn't a vampire. She just had this strange blood condition, and she convinced herself she was a vampire to cope. Which, sure, okay. Whatever you say, Carl. Then Susan gets up. She kind of starts wandering around. She ends up finding this knife that's exactly like Diane's. Carl says he sold it to Diane, and that's why they're so similar, and that it's really nothing, but Susan's hand ends up getting cut on the knife, and Carl sucks the blood off, seeming to imply Carl is also a vampire, which with his name I kind of assumed. But I think it's a lot funnier, the fact that it seems to imply that he could be lying, that there are only 5 of those knives that he has been selling, and that all vampires have the same ornate knife. They all have a theme just sitting around. And I love that for them. I hope they do. But that being said, that's how our movie ends. So just to recount our deaths, we have 6 kills, 3 of which are vampire food, 2 of which involve stabbing or impalement, and 1 of which was sun exposure. Now, I like this movie. I think it's fun. If you're not comfortable with the 70s sort of erotica feel of movies, it's not one for you. But it's hazy, and it's weird, and it's not trying to villainize her for being bisexual. The villainy is that she eats her lovers. That's what her issue is, and I enjoy that. That being said, baby, I'm gonna let you go. I hope you had a great one. I hope you had fun getting a little weird with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
My opinion was a horror